Imagine being jolted awake by smoke, coughing, blinded, terrified, and your 3 baby girls are trapped in the room behind an inferno you can't break through. You claw at the flames, you scream for help, neighbors have to drag you away as you try to run back inside. Any parent would call this a nightmare. But for Cameron Todd Willingham, this was only the beginning. Because instead of being seen as a father who lost everything, Texas decided he was a murderer. Overnight, a grieving parent became a monster in the public eye, accused of burning his own children alive. And the worst part? The evidence that sealed his fate wasn't evidence at all. It was superstition disguised as science. This happened in Corsicana, Texas, 1991. What followed was a chain of lies, myths, and catastrophic failures that ended with a man strapped to a gurney, about to die for a crime that never happened. Tonight, you're about to hear one of the most disturbing cases in American justice. A story of how an accidental house fire turned into a triple murder conviction. How junk science sent an innocent man to death row. And how those with the power to save him looked the other way. Stay with me, because what really happened inside that courtroom, that prison, and that execution chamber will haunt you long after this video ends. December 23, 1991. A small, worn-down house on West 11th Street in Corsicana, Texas. Inside, 3 little girls are sleeping. Amber, age 2. And twins Carmen and Cameron, just 1 year old. Their father, 23-year-old Cameron Todd Willingham, is asleep on the couch. Their mother, Stacy, has left early that morning to pick up Christmas presents at a relative's house. It's 2 days before Christmas, and those babies should have been waking up to unwrap gifts in 48 hours. Instead, they would never wake up at all. Around 9 in the morning, Todd wakes up to heat and smoke. The house is on fire. He tries to get to his daughter's room, but the flames are already too intense, the smoke too thick. He runs outside, screaming for help. Neighbors see him on the front lawn, hysterical, his hair singed, trying to get back into that burning house. They have to physically restrain him. One neighbor would later say Todd was so desperate he was attempting to break through the windows. Another said he had to tackle Todd to keep him from running back into the inferno. By the time firefighters arrive, the house is fully engulfed. When they finally get inside, they find all 3 girls dead in their bedroom. Smoke inhalation. The medical examiner would later note there were no signs of abuse on any of the children. They died together in their room because a fire moved too fast. But here's where everything goes wrong. Because almost immediately before the ashes have even cooled, fire investigators walk through that destroyed home and decide something. They decide this was arson. They decide someone set this fire on purpose. And they decide that someone was Todd Willingham. The lead investigator was a man named Manuel Vasquez, a deputy fire marshal. He had no formal training in fire science. No degree. He learned fire investigation the way it had been taught for decades, passed down from one investigator to another like folklore. And what he saw in that house, he said, were all the signs of arson. He pointed to poor patterns on the floor, dark stains he claimed were caused by liquid accelerant, probably lighter fluid, poured in puddles and lit on fire. He pointed to something called crazed glass, windows with cracks that he said could only be caused by a fire that burned extremely hot and fast, the kind of heat you get from accelerants. He looked at brown stains on the threshold of the front door and said they were proof that someone had poured accelerant there to block escape. He saw alligatoring on the walls, a scale-like pattern in burned wood, which, according to the old-school arson myths, meant the fire burned incredibly hot in that spot. Accelerants, murder, arson. Based on Manuel Vasquez's observations, Cameron Todd Willingham was arrested and charged with 3 counts of capital murder. Because in Texas, if you kill more than one person in the same crime, you can be executed. And if the victims are children, you're almost guaranteed to get the death penalty. The trial was a nightmare. The prosecution built their entire case on the fire evidence. They called Vasquez to the stand, and he told the jury with absolute certainty that this fire had been intentionally set. He walked them through his findings. The poor patterns, the crazed glass, the alligatoring. All signs, he said, that could only mean one thing: arson. The prosecutor painted Todd Willingham as a monster. A man who murdered his own babies because they were in his way, because he wanted freedom, because he was a sociopath. They pointed to the fact that Todd had a troubled past, that he'd been in fights, that he had a poster of the Grim Reaper in his house. They said he showed no emotion at the funeral, that he didn't cry enough, that he was cold. They brought in a jailhouse informant, a man named Johnny Webb, who claimed Todd confessed to him in jail, told him he set the fire to cover up abuse. Webb was a career criminal with every reason to lie. He was facing serious charges and was offered a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. But the jury believed him, because the fire science said Todd was guilty, and the informant confirmed it. Stacy Willingham, Todd's wife, testified for the prosecution. She told the jury that Todd had been abusive, that he had a temper, but she never said he would hurt the girls. In fact, in the weeks after the fire, Stacy had stood by Todd. She believed him. But as time went on, as investigators kept telling her the fire was arson, as prosecutors kept insisting her husband was a murderer, she began to doubt. The pressure was unbearable. Eventually, she testified against him. Years later, she would say she regretted it, that she didn't believe he did it, but by then it was too late. The defense didn't stand a chance. Todd's lawyer was overworked and underfunded. He didn't have the resources to hire his own fire expert. He couldn't challenge the science because he didn't understand it. Nobody did. Because the truth is, in 1992, almost no one in the criminal justice system knew that the science being used to convict people of arson was completely bogus. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all 3 counts. The penalty phase took a little longer, but not much. Cameron Todd Willingham was sent to death row in Texas, one of the most prolific execution chambers in the United States. And for 12 years he sat in a cell insisting he was innocent, writing letters, filing appeals, begging anyone who would listen to look at the evidence again. Most people ignored him, because the science said he did it, and you can't argue with science. Except you can, because it wasn't science at all. In 2004, just months before Todd's execution date, his case caught the attention of a man named Gerald Hurst. Dr. Hurst was a fire scientist, a chemist with a PhD from Cambridge University, a man who had actually studied how fires behave. He wasn't a small-town fire marshal who learned his trade from an old manual. He was one of the top fire experts in the world. And when he reviewed the evidence from the Willingham case, he was horrified. The pour patterns on the floor? Not from accelerants. They were flashover patterns, a natural occurrence in intense house fires where heat builds up until everything in the room ignites at once. It looks like something was poured, but it's just how fire spreads when a room reaches a certain temperature. The crazed glass? It happens in any intense fire. It has nothing to do with accelerants. The brown stains on the threshold? Probably residue from melted weather stripping or other materials. The alligatoring? Happens in all kinds of fires, not just arson. Every single indicator that Manuel Vasquez pointed to as proof of arson was a myth. Outdated. Wrong. Debunked by modern fire science. Hurst wrote a report. He explained in clear terms that there was no evidence of arson, that the fire could have been accidental, likely caused by a space heater or faulty wiring, that nothing about the burn patterns indicated intentional fire setting. He sent this report to Todd's lawyers, to the courts, to anyone who might listen. Surely he thought this would stop the execution. It didn't. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles reviewed Hurst's report. They had the power to recommend clemency to the governor. They could have stopped the execution. They didn't. The report was ignored. Governor Rick Perry, who had the final say, refused to grant a stay. The execution was scheduled to proceed. In the days before his death, Todd Willingham gave interviews. He maintained his innocence. He said he loved his daughters, that he would never hurt them, that he tried to save them. He was calm, articulate, and completely sincere. He didn't sound like a monster. He sounded like a man telling the truth. On February 17, 2004, Cameron Todd Willingham was executed by lethal injection. He was 43 years old. In his final statement, he told his ex-wife Stacy, who was in the witness room, that he forgave her. He told the victims' family members who came to watch him die that he hoped they found peace. And then he said those final words, that he was innocent, that he had been persecuted for something he did not do. They strapped him to a gurney and pushed chemicals into his veins. 6 minutes later, he was dead. But the story didn't end there. Because after Todd's execution, more experts started looking at the case. The Innocence Project got involved. Fire scientists across the country reviewed the evidence and came to the same conclusion Gerald Hurst had. There was no arson. The National Fire Protection Association rewrote their standards for fire investigation, specifically pointing out that many of the indicators used to convict Todd Willingham were unreliable. In 2009, a report commissioned by the state of Texas confirmed what everyone already knew. The fire investigation in the Willingham case was filled with errors. The science was wrong. A special commission was formed to investigate whether Texas had executed an innocent man. But before they could finish their work, Governor Rick Perry replaced several commission members, effectively shutting down the investigation. To this day, Texas has never officially acknowledged that Cameron Todd Willingham was innocent. They never admitted they killed the wrong man. But everyone knows. The evidence is overwhelming. Todd Willingham did not set that fire. He did not murder his daughters. He was a father who woke up to a house engulfed in flames and couldn't save his babies. And then the state punished him for it by taking his life. Stacy Willingham, Todd's ex-wife, has said publicly that she believes he was innocent, that she was manipulated by investigators, that she wishes she could take back her testimony, but she can't, because Todd is dead. The jailhouse informant, Johnny Webb, later recanted his testimony. He admitted he lied. He said prosecutors coached him, told him what to say, but it didn't matter, because Todd was already gone. And Manuel Vasquez, the fire investigator whose testimony sent Todd to death row, he never admitted he was wrong. He never apologized. He continued working as a fire investigator for years after Todd's execution. This case changed everything. It exposed the fact that for decades, people had been convicted of arson based on pseudoscience. That fire investigators across the country were using outdated, disproven methods to determine whether a fire was intentionally set. That innocent people were sitting in prisons or worse had already been executed because no one questioned the so-called experts. Cameron Todd Willingham's case became a rallying cry for death penalty opponents. It became proof that the system is broken, that we cannot trust the government to determine who lives and who dies. Because if Texas could execute an innocent man, ignore evidence of his innocence, and then cover it up, what does that say about justice? Todd Willingham spent 12 years on death row for a crime that never happened. His daughters died in a tragic accidental fire. And instead of grieving with him, the state of Texas accused him of murder, convicted him on junk science, and killed him. They strapped him to a gurney and injected poison into his veins. And he died insisting he was innocent. Because he was. There is no happy ending here. No exoneration. No apology. Just a man who died for nothing. 3 little girls who died in a fire. And a system that refused to admit it was wrong. Cameron Todd Willingham's name should be cleared. His conviction should be overturned posthumously. But Texas won't do it. Because admitting they executed an innocent man means admitting the system failed. And they'd rather let his memory be tarnished than face that truth. So Todd Willingham remains officially a convicted murderer. But history will remember him differently. As the man Texas killed for a fire that never was. As the father who couldn't save his daughters and was punished for it. As the innocent man who begged the world to listen and no one did. That's the story of Cameron Todd Willingham. A story of injustice so profound it's hard to believe it's real. But it is. And it happened in America. In Texas. In 2004. Not centuries ago. Not in some distant, uncivilized place. Here. No. In a country that claims to value justice above all else. Remember his name. Cameron Todd Willingham. An innocent man executed by the state of Texas.